Good morning, my friends, and welcome to our New Testament Challenge. This is Pastor Roger Vest with the Douglasville First United Methodist Church. Today I'll be reading to you the 26th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. Hear now the words of our Lord. When Jesus had finished saying all these things, he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." Then the chief priests and the elders of the people gathered in the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and they conspired to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. But they said, "Not during the festival, or there may be a riot among the people." Now, while Jesus was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar of very costly ointment, and she poured it on his head as he sat at the table. When the disciples saw it, they were angry and said, "Why this waste? For this ointment could have been sold for a large sum and the money given to the poor." But Jesus, aware of them, said, "Why do you trouble this woman? She has performed a good service for me. For you always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. By pouring this ointment on my body, she has prepared me for burial. Truly I tell you, wherever this good news is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in remembrance of her." Then one of the 12, who was called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priest and said, "What will you give me if I betray him to you?" And they paid Judas 30 pieces of silver. And from that moment he began to look for an opportunity to betray him. On the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus saying, "Where do you want us to make the preparations for you to eat the Passover?" And he said, "Go into the city to a certain man and say to him, 'The teacher says, my time is near. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples.'" So the disciples did as Jesus directed them, and they prepared the Passover meal. When it was evening, he took his place with the 12, and while they were eating, he said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." And they became greatly distressed and began to say to one another, "Surely not I, Lord. Surely not I." And he answered, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. Now the Son of Man goes as it is written of him, but woe to the one by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that one not to have been born." Judas, who betrayed him, said, "Surely not I, Rabbi." And he replied, "You have said so." While they were eating, Jesus took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, gave it to his disciples, and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from this, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will never again drink of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." And when they had sung the hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus said to them, "You will all become deserters because of me this night. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. And after I am raised up, I will go ahead of you to Galilee." Well, Peter said to him, "Though all become deserters because of you, I will never desert you." Jesus said to him, "Truly I tell you, this very night, before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times." Peter said to him, "Even though I must die with you, I will not deny you." And so said all the disciples. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And he took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, and began to be grieved and agitated. And he said to them, "I am deeply grieved, even unto death. Remain here and stay awake with me." And going a little farther, he threw himself on the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not what I want, but what you want." Then he came to the disciples and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, "So you couldn't stay awake with me 1 hour? Stay awake and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again he went away for the second time and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." Again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the third time, saying the same words. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? See, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." And while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign saying, "The one I kiss is the man, arrest him." At once he came up to Jesus and said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you are here to do." Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and arrested him. Suddenly one of those with Jesus put his hand out on his sword, drew it, and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled, which say it must happen in this way?" And at that hour Jesus said to the crowds, "Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as though I were a bandit? Day after day I sat in the temple teaching, and you did not arrest me. But all this has taken place so that the scriptures of the prophets may be fulfilled." Then all the disciples deserted him, and they fled. Now those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, in whose house the scribes and the elders had gathered. But Peter was following him at a distance, as far as the courtyard of the high priest, and going inside, he sat with the guards in order to see how this would end. Now the chief priest and the whole council was looking for false testimony against Jesus so that they could put him to death. But they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. At least 2 came forward and said, "This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and build it in 3 days." High priest said, "Have you no answer? What is it that they testify against you?" But Jesus was silent. And then the high priest said to him, "I put you under oath before the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "You have said so. But I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has blasphemed. Why do we still need witnesses? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your verdict?" And they answered, "He deserves death." Then they spat in his face and struck him, and some slapped him, saying, "Prophesy to us, you Messiah. Who is it that struck you?" Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him and said, "You also were with Jesus, the Galilean." But he denied it before all of them, says, "I don't know what you're talking about." When he went out to the porch, another servant girl saw him and said to the bystanders, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." Again he denied it with an oath, "I don't know the man." After a while, the bystanders came up and said to Peter, "Certainly you're also one of them, for your accent betrays you." Then he began to curse, and he swore an oath, "I do not know the man." And at that moment, the cock crowed. Then Peter remembered what Jesus had said, "Before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. This is the word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God. So let's look at the 26th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. We are at the last days of Jesus' life. Chapter 26 is basically the day before he's crucified, and so there's a lot going on here. At the beginning of the chapter, the chief priest and the elders gather together and talk about how they can plot against Jesus, how they can kill him. Um, he's at a house in Bethany, and this woman comes and anoints him uh, on his head, and he says, this is for his burial. Judas here goes and offers, to betray Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. And then he comes down, he has the Passover meal with the disciples. And he talks about that. He gets very disturbed um, and greatly distressed and began. He says, one of you is going to betray me. And they kept saying, "Is it me? Is it me? Is it me?" Um, and then we go into the institution of the Lord's Supper, and just all of this, it's just kind of, it's so chock full of intense emotions. And it's interesting that the Lord's Supper is instituted here. It's begun in this time, and so that should say something to us about the importance of this meal. He talks about Peter's denial, you know. And then he goes and he takes Peter and James and John with him to Gethsemane, and he's praying. He says he began to be grieved and agitated. And for me, this is one of those very intentional description of Jesus's humanity. We know he says, "Yet Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me, but not what I want, but what you want." He understood, what he was going into, but he also didn't want to suffer. And again, that's one of the things. It's a wonderful juxtaposition of his divinity and his humanity, and it's important for us to know both. We go in. Judas comes up and betrays him with a kiss. One of the disciples cuts off the slave of the high priest, um, and he says, "No, this is how it's supposed to be." At verse 56, he said, "Then all the disciples deserted him and fled." Jesus comes before the high priest, and the priest says, I can do this. I can let you go. Why do you say these things? Or actually, he doesn't say that. Herod says that, but he says, you blasphemed. And they answered, he deserves death. And then Peter was sitting outside and trying to listen in, and he's three different times he comes up and denies that he even knows the man. He even began to curse, and he swore an oath, "I do not know the man." And at that moment, the cock crowed, and then Peter remembered what Jesus had said: "Before the cock crows, you'll deny me three times." And he went out and wept bitterly. So this chapter is just very, very strong emotions. It's very at the end, things are going. There's not a whole lot of in between. You're either one way or the other, and it's just interesting how that works. So powerful, powerful preparation for the day of crucifixion. So hopefully you found this to be helpful, and we'll see you again. Talk to you again tomorrow.